Thanks for staying with us. Joining me now live in studio, the former Prime Minister and current Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for MICOUD South, the Honourable Alan Chastanet. Welcome to the platform. Thanks for waking up early and joining us.
Thanks to be here.
Let's delve right into it. We have lots to discuss. Back to school. The hundreds of students and teachers, school officials went back into school on Monday of this week. Let's start off. How much are parents and their kids missing out on the proposed e-books at this particular time?
I guess if we have to measure it, $1,000 per child. You know, we had put in a process where we created an e-book, and I want to make the distinction between the e-book and a laptop. So the e-book is a facility or a product that's like a computer, so it operates like a computer, but the programming on it is only for the books. Right? So a kid couldn't go onto the search engine and search anything that they want to. The searches are limited to references from within the book. So you know, like when you get to the bottom of a chapter in a book, it gives you references where you can go and read. Yeah. It actually provides the automatic link to those things. So imagine now your child having all of their books on this product, this ebook platform. And what's great about it is that the software in that ebook acts as a teacher's aid. So it tells the teacher how much time a child has spent on a chapter, whether in fact they've done their homework, right? And it's very easy for a teacher to just ask a couple of questions to determine whether in fact the child did the homework themselves. Why is that important? If you're going to have, and you're going to meet the parent, they're going to meet a parent, they can now actually show physically the interaction between the teacher and the child. And where we were going to take it, the next step, was to actually film the best teachers in each of the different disciplines. So the best biology teacher in Form 2, the best math teacher in Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, Form 5. And the purpose of that, Shannon, is that children now would have equal access to the best in class.
Practices.
Okay? So if you didn't really understand what was taking place in your class, you had the ability to go back now and see the best teacher in our school system giving that lecture on that particular chapter. And again, as an adult, you know, when my child comes to me and wants to do work that I did how many years ago and I can't remember, I myself can go back on and refresh myself in being able to help my teacher, because I can hear it firsthand from that child. That is what that platform was provided. And from a financial perspective, that platform meant that we were going to pay the license fee. So the license fee that a parent would have had to have paid was $350. And that gives you access to all the books for the curriculum for the year.
$350 EC.
$350 EC. Now, because of COVID, our government agreed to pay for the tablet, and also we had paid for 2 years of the fee. So it means that parents this year, as an example, would not have had to pay anything. And for all those students, particularly the young girls I see walking around these huge bags, right? The ability to have everything in your ebook in one bag is amazing. And I think that what's also important is that we were giving young kids and children in general a tool that they were going to be using in the workforce, right? Because that's where the world is going from a technological perspective. Whether you go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, whether you go to a hotel, whether you go to a manufacturing plant, everything now is being done with that kind of iPad kind of technology. And so it gives the kid the comfort that by the time they get to their workplace, it's something that they're very familiar with, because it's the same principles that are making it happen. So I feel very sorry for the parents, because this government now has gone back to giving people a laptop. There's nothing on the laptop. In fact, there's only trouble on the laptop, because the kids that don't have the necessary discipline are allowed to freely navigate the web as they want to. It has no software programs. It doesn't support the school system. I think the teachers that were now starting to use the ebooks, and I met a couple of them, were very, very happy, because it was making their lives substantially easier in moving forward. So sadly, it's going backwards from a technological perspective, and now it's putting a huge financial burden on the parents of this country.
Yeah, Trinidad, the government over there has announced that it's moving in that direction of e-books. We know the mad rush here for textbooks. Many students going back to class without books. Have we missed a golden opportunity? We
have. And look, to go back to books, to do what? So even when we have the new editions, the license fee contemplated that, and once there was an update, it's automatically updated. You don't have to go and buy any new books. So we're constantly providing kids with the same curriculum. Now, the reason why the government was paying for all of these things was twofold. One, because of COVID, the financial burden that existed in the country, we felt that was the right thing to do. And secondly, it gave parents the option of still buying the books if they wanted to. Right? So some kids may not adapt to that level of technology right off the bat, and it may take them a period of time to transition to it. So we didn't want it to be that the parents were having to buy both things, in fact, increasing the cost of the school system. So we have definitely moved backwards. And when you think of that platform and now how you can develop it, so when I heard that the OECS now was contemplating in designing a platform for it, which is great, because then that just becomes the easier transition. And our plan was not just that. We were actually training people in St. Lucia to repair the books. We put in an insurance program that if a child broke or lost a book, they would get one replacement. And if in fact afterwards they would then have to pay for the replacement, which I think is fair. But the reality is that we had a team around the island ready now to be able to provide the maintenance to these books. But the goal was that the book was supposed to last a child, one through their primary and then another one through their secondary school education.
Finally, on education for now, and a reminder to our viewers that the phone lines remain open, 450-0777. The general preparation
appreciate why that comment was made. That wasn't about being mean, right? If education is going to transform itself, because the way that we were It's no longer functional. And I think we know and understand more and more about kids, and with the technology available, it gives us an opportunity to change the format in which we're going to be teaching. Then the design of the school has to be redone to facilitate what we're going to be doing. Right? So they say to you, form before design. You must understand what the function is going to be, then you design a building to suit. But when Gail took me around to some of the schools, I was shocked. Because we're talking about basics. I mean, there's a school not too far from here, Mondadon. Right? The roof was leaking to the extent that when it rained, it was easier to bring the kids on the outside than keep the money inside. And had not been repaired for years. The bathrooms were in a deplorable condition. The railings were rotten, and you know it's a school on a hillside. Yeah. So that's when myself and Captain agreed to make an allocation. We allocated $10 million a year for 3 years, and we didn't get to fix up all the schools. We fixed up a lot of schools. I mean, the Soufriere Comprehensive School was pathetic. They didn't even have doors. Doors. So people were literally coming in every time they needed a chair, they would go to the school and steal the chair. Now, that also is an indictment against us as a society. That a public facility that's so important in the development of our children, our nation, and to prepare our children for the workforce and to be, you know, active members of our society, of our republic. That we disrespect it to that extent.
And even more so that we keep it in that manner before your tenure. No doors.
No doors.
And we see the kids are the future.
Correct.
Of
now,
this country.
The reason why that the former government couldn't do it is because of the state of the economy and the government. And this is, again, I think that as St. Lucians, we need to have a greater sense of appreciation and understanding of our own republic. Where do we want it to go to? Now, if in fact the republic, our country, our government, cannot even meet its basic bills, so it's not generating enough money, so is it that it's not taxing enough? Or is it that the economy isn't big enough? Right? And I would say to you that the GDP, the gross domestic product of this country, which represents the economic output of this country, is too small, $2 billion. I mean, I was just in Tortola, right? 24 square miles. And they have $1 billion US GDP. Okay, no agriculture, right? Just offshore financial services and tourism, right? We're grossly underperforming, and that underperformance in our economy is preventing the government from making the necessary investments to make us more competitive.
And it's a discussion that must be had because we end up performing for a number of reasons. The design of our development agenda, the policy support to drive these same initiatives.
Absolutely.
But, let's move on to another pressing issue of the day, the crime situation. We call it the national crime crisis. It indeed is a crisis. If you look at the figures, the national homicide rate stands now at 48. We're two ahead of the same rate that we were last year. We'll get to that, but we have a call that my producers are saying let's take it. Good morning. Welcome to the platform.
Hi, good morning, Shannon. Good morning, Mr. Chastanet.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Okay, I would like to go on the subject of the ebooks and the laptops. Firstly, I'd like to say that I support the idea of the ebooks, right? But I think there are some things that are not very clear. I'm hearing a lot about the merits and the demerits of the program, but we are not getting a lot of details for either one of them. So the first thing I'd like to ask you before I ask anything else is, do you think that there is any merit at all for the laptops? Because at the end of the day, as you explained just now, the ebooks are limited to the books on there and the school curriculum and whatever. But in terms of research, going and do other things, the ebook is not able to do that. So do you give any credence at all to the laptops?
Again, understanding the financial limitation that many parents have. If you had to choose between the two, the ebook is a much better choice. So the fact that the government is going to provide the ebook, and also if government chooses, and I think that right now with what's taking place globally financially and and the economic impact in St. Lucia, I think the government is justified in paying for the license fee. So it means that parents would have saved $1,000 plus per year. I think that if the government wants to provide laptops for families, I would support that. But the reality is, I think that the priority ought to be given to the ebooks, because the ebook solves a lot of problems. And the ebooks is going to help kids not only in learning their basic academic stuff, but more importantly, use a tool that is going to be used for the rest of their life and become familiar with it.
Okay, all right. Well, I can accept that, but I still think at the end of the day, maybe there is space for both. It's just a matter of working out the financials and whatever. But the ebook is definitely something, when you're looking at the cost to parents, that is something I think definitely should be on the front burner. And then I am sure if the government chooses to make it a priority, they will find a way to provide laptops much needed, because some people, just like the books, are unable to purchase laptops for use. And you know it is something, computers are something that's where we're going, and the children really need that. Just 1 second, let me just ask my question, then you'll go ahead. What I would really like to find out from the two programs, the laptop and the ebooks, is the inherent cost. What is costing to have both of them? So what did it cost the government to get all the ebooks? What did it cost the government to get the laptops? And because we're not really getting that kind of information. Basically, like I said, I've been hearing the merits and the demerits of it, but nobody is saying the financials and the long-term effects, whatever, if there are pros and cons in that way. So that's what I would like to get cleared up as well, apart from the pros and cons. Just saying, well, a laptop could do that, and that side they say, well, no, the ebook's more important because, you know, the cost of the book to the parents. So that's what I would like to. I would like a holistic look at both of the programs, so that then people could say, okay, yes, I think right now the ebooks is more of a priority, or I should say, no, the laptops is more of a priority. So, yes, Shannon?
Thank you.
If I can just maybe say something that might help you a little bit.
Sure.
I think those are all very relevant questions. And I would probably think, and I don't know the number offhand, but I would imagine that the laptops are probably a little bit more expensive than what the ebooks were. But it really is the functionality. So I go back to my learning days. I was not a very good student in terms of my attentiveness in class. I probably missed a lot of things, and I had to really retrain myself when I got to higher forms of education to really concentrate in class. And I think that the ebooks provides us with an opportunity to equalize the education system in St. Lucia. So this thing of where we're sitting exams and everybody believes that the convent or St. Mary's or Hess School are the best schools because those are where the best teachers are. And somehow when persons go to other schools, they're getting a lesser of education. The ebook platform starts leveling that playing field, because in it is a program that allows you to embed now a video of the kids of all the different classes. I mean, and when you look at the America now, a lot of parents now are able to keep their kids at home because education is being offered on that level of platform. And very importantly, the administrative part of it, where teachers now could monitor students. So the ebook has in it a whiteboard. So if in fact the student is home, the teacher is at home, the teacher can get on and connect with the student and actually be drawing like if they're drawing on the chalkboard right in front of that child. And this is all being recorded, so as a parent, if you ever want to know what the level of interaction has been with the teacher and your child, there's an evidence, a trail of what that has been. So I can tell you, for the teachers, it means that they were spending less time administratively and more time actually being able to teach. Mm-hmm. So just from that alone, sir, even if the two platforms cost the same amount of money, it's much better. And that's what I'm saying to you. In an ideal world, yes, you can have two. But if you were going to have one, I would say to you that you would want the e-book first.
Yeah. Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we were talking crime before the caller came in. Very worrying situation. You get a clear sense that there is a policy and vision to deal with it firmly?
No, because, I mean, when you look at the fact that there's two ministers. So here it is that the government knew coming in that crime was an issue. They had highlighted it themselves. So you're going to tell me, just even from that the solution is to have two ministers? Right? And the reality is that we're past the days where people have to be guessing what has to take place from a crime perspective. To solve crime in St. Lucia, it's a holistic problem. It's a holistic issue. You need the forensic lab, right? Because you need to get convictions. To get convictions, you have to have evidence. We were creating a separate unit at the forensic lab to be able to collect the evidence, right? Because there are many times cases have been dropped because the evidence has been tarnished, right? You needed a faster legal system. We have over 1,000 case backlog on criminal cases, right? So crime does pay because you can commit the crime and it's going to take years before it comes to the court system. But as I'm at pains to say to everyone that by the time the crime is committed and the police get involved, it's too late. Because now you're talking about punishing people. What we have to do is to change the values in our society to prevent the crime from taking place in the first place. And we know statistically, so it's not about guessing, that where the crime is coming from, particularly the most violent crime, which is the murders, is from the gangs. Now, you have to ask yourself as a St. Lucian an honest question. Are we, as a St. Lucian society, offering young people an opportunity that can compete against what the gangs are offering young persons? Just even from a financial perspective. What a kid believes he can earn and maybe earns in being in a gang versus going to a construction job, getting up at 3:30 in the morning, traveling sometimes an hour and a half to be able to get to work. And it's hard labor, right? And you have to say to yourself at the end of the month when you look at your pay, is this going to help me buy a house? Is this going to help me raise a family? Because that's what everybody aspires for. And I think that's where we go back to the education system. That's where we go back to our social fabric. That's where we go back to family planning to help families provide the level of support to young people to put them in a position in which they can get meaningful jobs. And a meaningful job to me is a job where I can save money at the end of the day, I can afford a house, I can afford to get a car, I can afford to travel.
I think, Prime Minister Chastanet, we can agree that we're failing as a society and we're not in a position to compete with the gangs.
Correct.
How can we change that?
Because we have to become and accept that we have some tough decisions to make. So when I was Prime Minister, and we are talking about bringing in a cabinet to the table or bringing a DSH to the table, and that there are some persons who would say, oh, we're bringing foreigners, right? The reason why we were bringing foreigners is because they were bringing in the capital and the know-how to develop the resource we have, which is called land. Right? And to maximize the output of that land. What I mean by maximizing the output is maximizing the employment, maximizing the taxes, maximizing the linkages back into our economy. And so talking economics and desiring growth and understanding that we're underperforming economically is not just me talking as a capitalist. It's me talking about as a socialist. So the program that I did at university was called development banking. And the reason why the development banking program was established, because too many governments in the 70s and the 80s were overemphasizing the social aspect of it and not emphasizing how they were going to pay for it. And that's why they were getting into the debt that they were in, because they were investing heavily into social programs that were not generating any level of economic return. The same way I said with COVID, that it has to be a balance between lives and livelihoods, it's the same way with economic development. We need to generate that level of economic growth to add tax revenue to the base of the St. Lucia so that the government can adequately invest in the necessary things. We were not investing enough in road maintenance. We were spending $1 million a year in road maintenance. The assessment was you need to spend at least $10 million a year just on road maintenance. And you have to spend another $20 to $30 million on developing new roads. We're not even close to that. We're having to constantly borrow money to be able to do that. We should have the resources to be able to do that for ourselves. That's what the gas tax did. It put $30 million in a year into the hands of the government in order to facilitate that kind of program. So if we're going to provide an alternative to young persons, it starts from a very young age. And I'm a big believer in sports and the arts. Now, in order for sports and the arts, but particularly sports, to be successful, there has to be competition. So what drives the Jamaican athletic program is that level of competition. And I just want your audience to bear with me for a moment. What that competition does, it means that a young guy knows that if he wants to succeed, and succeeding comes with its rewards, that he has to apply himself. So he learns discipline. Okay? He's not going to be out drinking and smoking. Okay? He's not going to get into trouble because he realizes, boy, I have a career ahead of me. Take your young girl, Julian Alfred. Julian Alfred didn't get to where she was by accident. I mean, when I met this young woman, I was so impressed as to how focused that she was. So much so that when she came back from Trinidad when she was 13, and a Jamaican coach said she had an opportunity, she already made up in her mind she was going. It was only left for her mother to find a way to support her to do it. And she was willing to make all of the personal sacrifices to do that. And the level of training that she goes through. Nothing happens without that level of investment. So the reality is, I would like to see a society that where we're training young kids to understand and to appreciate, to be successful in life, these are the things that you have to be able to apply yourself. And that they would have had first-hand evidence, both in their own success and then seeing other people successful. So a great example in this country is the Aquatic Center. So here it is, 125-meter swimming pool. And there is 8 clubs. And each club has a primary school team, has a secondary school team, and in the primary school level, there's a beginners, there's an intermediate, and an advanced. Now, every week, there's competitions because you have 7 clubs using the same pool. And anytime you want to bring now international competition, if you just bring 2 or 3 teams, now the remaining 7 teams here can make up 3 or 4 teams. But it's that constant competition and that experience in competition that helps motivate young kids now in their training program. Now, one of the successes is that the parents' involvement, and that's what I want to say to St. Lucians. If we generally want to see our crime situation go down, parents have to get re-involved. So, as an athlete here in St. Lucia, when I played basketball, national team, so I'm not even talking about club, national team, we had to raise our own money to buy our tickets. We had to get our own uniforms. As an athlete?
Obviously, we're not giving the requisite support to our young people, and the issue of crime management can be tackled on 2 fronts. There's need for greater investment in social programs and social support to and education. But on the other end of it is law enforcement, dismantling the criminal gangs. And when we hosted Gary Griffith, the former Trinidad and Tobago Police Commissioner, on this program, he said that throughout the Caribbean region there appears to be a lack of political willpower. Just bear with me, please, to address the crime situation head on. There's a lot of fancy rhetoric, but no strong political power. You still have politicians giving large contracts to the criminal associations. And take, for example, in our local St. Lucia, an example during the period 2006 to 2011 in Castries North. Constituency office of former Prime Minister King. A young man coming to get service was attacked and murdered at the facility. Nothing has changed. Is there the political willpower to deal with the gangs and the criminal issues head on?
I think it depends on who you talk to. Now, and again, I say these things because we'd said them, but maybe they weren't appreciated as much. When we came into government in 2016, we didn't present a 5-year plan. We presented a 10-year plan. And people say, oh, that's very obnoxious of you. an overconfident view. I said, no, I'm hoping that we can do enough work that we convince people we're on the right track and to give us that second term. So we cannot tackle it in one term. And the current political system, that's not unique to St. Lucia. A 5-year term is still a very short period of time. And at some point, politicians all think about being reelected. And therefore, sometimes what needs to be done isn't done because we need immediate expediency. So if you take St. Kitts as an example, the crime situation was very bad there. And the government chose to go and engage the criminals, right, and actually start paying them. Right? Now, is that the right way? Is that something that's going to be sustainable? Now, if it gives you a reprieve, I think that there's no problem. But is there reform that's taking place? Because really what you want is for people to want to participate in your system. Now, crime is being, I think, exploited. So you have people who are just looking for a fast buck and who love that kind of work. You know, the drug trafficking, the money laundering, and everything that goes with it. The fact is that there is a huge catchment of persons that they can recruit. And we are facilitating that. So I have said it a couple of times. I've been criticized heavily for saying it. But the single mothers who drop out of school, who have 3 to 4 children, who've never had a job, the state has to become the father. Because leaving that mother to fend for herself, right? The child growing up in that household doesn't hate their mother. They start resenting society for putting their mother through that. Because at some age, it dawns on them that the mother, right, is being treated differently than everybody else. Now, I joke, but I'm serious. When I was a young boy, we didn't have cell phones. In fact, when I was growing up, we had where you used to call the operator, right, and she'd patch you through to where you were going. Yet, when I did something wrong, before I got home, my parents already knew. How was that?
Yeah, society took responsibility.
Society took responsibility. These days, I'm not getting involved. Okay? And even within families, you never had that. Where did the term auntie and uncle come from? It was a term of endearment. And that endearment came from where? Because people cared about us. We pass by homes, we see that there are families who are struggling. We turn a blind eye to it. And maybe because we feel that our problems are so overwhelming that we don't have the ability. But it comes back to bite us. You know, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was a gentleman who had a convenience store in Marcia, and he was killed. And it was 2 young boys from that same community. And I always say, how many times do you think he may have helped those young boys? And they turned on him. And so that's a direct example of where we're not trying to solve the problem. We have young people who are crying out to us from a society. That's what I see the gang thing as, crying out for help, right? And who dropped out of school. There was no support system to put them back into school. No alternative way was given to them, right? And yet they have big dreams and great aspirations. And so the time to mold that is when they're younger. Businesses, in terms of making sure that there's opportunities for young people to get gainfully employed and putting training programs in instead of being perceived as exploiting the workers, right? So there's a whole societal change that has to take place in order for us to address this. Government cannot do this by themselves. And I really resent the blame on the police. I think that the police should be held accountable and should manage their affairs probably a lot better. But to blame the crime rate on the police is in itself a crime.
Yeah. Finally, on crime, when you look at Deriso, it's happening at the football games. It's in Vieux Fort, a once peaceful community. It's in the Prime Minister's backyard in Marcia. It's here, there, and everywhere. National crisis. Have we come to a point now where there needs to be genuine dialogue by all the major stakeholders, yourself and the current government? And I'll ask you this question in the context of what you hear and see from people. Is the sky really falling, or has it fallen?
The sky has been falling. So to deny that it's falling is crazy. The reality is that our religious institutions have lost a lot of favor. And so the role they used to play in family building has diminished. So it's not difficult to appreciate where we are. I think that St. Lucia needs to pause and as a society collectively know where we want to go to and to understand that there's nobody coming to our aid. Nobody owes us anything. There's too many people who, when I speak to them, believe that the UK or the US or somebody else owes them something, right? What I have found in life in Shannon, and I also found in politics, when you go and you're constantly begging and complaining, right? People then feel sympathy for you. Whereas if in fact you're putting your best foot forward and you're trying really hard, okay, and you're coming to meetings and you're able to hold your own weight, people then empathize with you. And the difference between sympathy and empathy is sympathy is you see somebody, you really don't know how you're going to help them, you don't really want to get overly involved, so you just give them a token. Right? Empathy is to say, I want to understand why you're in the plight you are, and what is it I can do and spend time with you to be able to help develop you as a person or as a country. I think that we need to grow up to the extent, it may not be right, but it's the way it is, right? That we have to carry our own weight. God has blessed this island with great people, great topography, we're at a great geographical location, there are a lot of attributes we have. We need to manage those attributes, but it's almost like persons don't want to choose the lesser between two evils at times, and persons don't want to make that level of sacrifice. But again, your education system is very important because do we teach enough civil courses in what is society, what is a republic, what is a government, what's democracy? We use these terms, but do we really understand and appreciate what those terms are? So I always find the measurement of a society is our Constitution. Right? We inherited our Constitution. America wrote its own Constitution. Its Constitution came into effect for a purpose. Right? Now, it took Canada over 100 years. It was Pierre Trudeau over 200 years to rewrite its own Constitution. And it was traumatic. That's where the conflict between Quebec and the other provinces came out. And when you're trying now to redo a constitution, but it's an important process. I'm not saying to you that we should go out and redo our constitution tomorrow, but we should be building up our society and educating our citizens to the point where they understand what those things are. And I think that I always used to come to my meetings and I would say, the first thing we need is to establish what the finish line is. Because if you and I say we're going to compete against each other and we're going to be in a race, you may think we're running 100 meters. I may think I'm running 800 meters. Somebody else thinks they're running a marathon. The terminologies that we're going to use, stamina, speed, and fitness, etc., and tactics, are all applicable, but their interpretation becomes different. Right? So in St. Lucia, are we all sharing the same finish line? Or are the majority of people sharing the same finishing line? And I don't think that there's enough engagement. And that engagement cannot be done by politicians because it would come across as being bipartisan. I mean, partisan politics that's going to be played. So really there are other members of our society that need to play a more significant role. And when we talk about civil society, and you hear me calling out civil society all the time, because civil society has a role to play. The justice system has a role to play. And when these institutions start breaking down in a small society, then we have what we have.
We continue our discussion now 5 minutes after 8 o'clock. Let me just say before we continue to my co-producer who has know is following, we need to alert Mr. Raghunan and the CEO that we are 20 minutes behind our scheduled time, so please bear patience with us, and my executive producers here will allow us extra time this morning, so if we can just communicate with Mr. Raghunan and the CEO, the Chief Education Officer, Deputy, and let him know that we are still engaging our very first guest, and we will get to him later and we'll allow him the full complement of time as well. Let's look at the economy. It's not performing well, and there are evident signs of it everywhere. You don't have to look too far to see that the economy is really not performing well. What is the government not doing to grow the economy and to drive business and bring in more investors, put more money in the pockets of St. Lucians and more people at work?
It's playing politics. Look at Cabot. Forget about all the rhetoric. Has anything changed? The project's still going ahead. The project's still doing what it was supposed to be doing, right? And so all of this criticism and allegations against a foreign investor. I mean, even this whole absurdity of chastising the NIC for investing in the project. So I was the one who went to NIC to encourage NIC to buy land. So we had the Shock land that was available. We had Mont Piedmont in Rodney Bay that was available. And you had the Cabot land that was available, right? And I was encouraging, as Prime Minister, the NIC to purchase these things because they were being get at distressed levels, right? And to take it out of the receiver's hands. So at least putting it into an entity that had the capacity to think forward, right? While NIC was looking at purchasing the land, an investor came in and said that he was prepared to build land. Now let's look at the difference between the investor and NIC. NIC doesn't have really a development arm that could have developed a golf course with a hotel. That's not what is in their domain. So you had a group coming in with that level of talent. So the agreement was that NIC would lend them $10 million. They would give them the entire 400 acres as collateral. So the land was worth over $30 million. So it means that NIC was more than covered, and NIC was getting the interest rates on it. And now the persons were coming in and developing it, because that's what you want to see is the development. Now, this is not an ordinary developer. Okay? Ben Crenshaw and Kaiser are right now the two best golf course designers in the world. So we're talking world class. And having that signature course in St. Lucia is a huge benefit to us. And look at who our competitors are. Look what's going on in Barbados. What Sandy Lane has done with golf in Barbados. Look what's going on in the Dominican Republic, in Punta Cana and in La Romana, okay, Casa de Campo. Go to Puerto Rico. They're actually hosting PGA events. So this is where you want to be. If you want to be in that game to attract the top golfers in the world and to be known as a golf course destination, if you're not going to have 100 golf courses, then whatever golf courses you have, they have to be
world class.
They have to be world class. I mean, that's just obvious. Okay? So were they world class? Had they developed golf courses before? And the answer is several golf courses. They're world renowned. And bringing in housing development, which the time was perfect because of what took place with COVID. So all of a sudden now is a huge thrust of people wanting to buy secondary homes. And all of a sudden now you have a world golf course on a beautiful site of land that was generating no jobs and no taxes. And it sat there forever. And the reality is that NIC could not and did not have the ability to do that. But what does NIC do? It invests its resources. So if it can invest its resources in a product in St. Lucia in which it's generating economic output and it is getting its economic return in a secure investment, win, 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 win. Now, when you would find a government that would go to the extent to demonize that kind of investor for politics, it's a sad day for us.
Yeah, we saw what happened with Cabot. DSH as well, but let me draw reference to the Cabot situation and what we see on the other end of the island in Sabucha.
With Marjorie.
With Marjorie and the community of Fiette now.
Sure.
Miss Marjorie, after a lot of lobbying, she received a hefty payment, and she's still being accommodated within the Cabot development. In Sabucha, the residents... And I'm happy for Marjorie. Right. Okay. In Sabucha, the residents, some of whom have been there for 30 years, are being asked to move, and they will be sold or lease the new properties. In your mind, is that fair?
No, because you've created the precedence. And if you don't treat those residents in the same way in which you treated Marjorie, then now we have to be suspicious. What do we have to be suspicious of? That you had a minister of infrastructure and planning holding up Cabot. And then you had a minister who went in his private capacity as a lawyer to smooth over things. So is this good cop, bad cop? And is in fact, you know what we call that? That's called extortion. Is that what happened? Now, why can't the same thing happen down at St. Lucia? So to my mind, the equivalent is that not only are you going to give the people the land, but you're going to build in their homes. And then you're also going to give them money.
Yeah, we have a caller on the line. We'll get back to St. Lucia and Fiette in just a bit. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the platform.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning to the greatest leader on the planet.
How are you doing, my brother?
I'm Michael Chastanet. 2 questions. They're talking about crime down there. The addicts lift the dogs. And they say the government said they're concerned about crime, and they got rid of the dogs. I got a problem with that. Next thing, the governor of the ECCB said St. Lucia is about to have 8% growth.
I was getting to that caller.
Now, no bananas going out or selling. Tourism is low. Construction is 0. But yet this man is saying to me that St. Lucia is about to get unemployment is about 100%, almost 60-70%. And this man is saying to me that St. Lucia is about to hit 8% growth. So am I stupid or something? Am I missing something, sir?
Sorry?
The assessment by the ECCB, and I think it was announced by the Prime Minister that he's expecting 8% growth.
It wasn't ECCB, it was ECA. ECLA. ECTAL,
Okay.
sorry. Not ECTAL, ECA, which is a Latin American regional entity. So let's discuss that. So first of all, the policies of the United Workers' Party coming out of COVID, which we were heavily criticized, right? And people were made to believe that we were pushing construction and road construction, right? Though people don't eat roads. Yeah. And more importantly was to say that we were doing it for ulterior motives, that we were really doing it because we wanted to benefit other people, right? The practice of coexisting with COVID and putting both lives and livelihoods on the table, I was criticized for reopening the economy and trying to push tourism. But it was the combination of the tourism and the with construction, because I knew that tourism would never get back to the 2019 level. Right? So if it could not get back, where were you going to stimulate the rest of the economy to recover? So it was construction. And why construction? Because it was the only thing that you could do very quickly. And that's why we went to 3 firms and borrowed $50 million each from them. They borrowed the money. And all we agreed to do is to repay it back over a 5 to 6 year period, under the same terms that have existed forever, right? And the caller is 100% correct. We saw a 12.5% growth, which means that we recovered 50% of what we lost during COVID, okay? Now, the only country to have grown faster in the CARICOM was Guyana. But Guyana never contracted, and Guyana's growth was coming out of oil. So let's put Guyana off the table, because Guyana had an extraordinary and exceptional circumstance. The closest country to St. Lucia in growth was Dominica at 6%. Barbados was 1.5%. In fact, in tourism terms, Barbados, which normally has many more tourists than St. Lucia, we had 155,000 U.S. arrivals. Barbados had 144,000 in total. And St. Lucia had 200,000 compared to their 144,000. Right? So the policies worked. Construction worked because the economy grew by 12.5%. ECLAC's assessment and prediction of an 8% growth was coming out of the momentum that had already been created. And the assumption was that the HIA airport would be under construction, St. Jude's, that you had the Dahir Mall,
so
you had
that robust
Cabot project, you had the Point
activity.
Seraphim project, you had the other roads, you had the Millennium Highway and the West Coast Road coming, right? You had the continuation of the bridge, all of these things. And the caller's 100% right. You stopped it. You stopped Tavern, you stopped Shock, you stopped the Rodney Bay Road, you stopped the HIA, you stopped St. Jude's, okay? The push that we were going towards putting a cruise ship terminal in the south, that is stopped.
So the 8% projection is not realistic?
Not realistic. And not only that, tourism is not going to recover back to its 2019 level. So we got back to 50%. I think that at best, we're going to be back to 3/4, right? Because they don't know what they're doing. And there's some very bad news coming down the pipeline for St. Lucia as it pertains to tourism. We've already seen the numbers going down. I alluded at the interview yesterday. In February of this year.
I'll listen off air.
Thank you, caller.
In February, we warned the government the impact of inflation.
High interest rates, increased interest
Well,
rates.
we said inflation and the supply chain issues. They laughed at us. I went out in end of March and gave them a 6-point plan. He tore it up. He said he threw it in the garbage bin. And they've not reacted, and the businesses and the households have suffered because of it. I mean, at Coco Palm, with a 40% occupancy, our electricity bill was $90,000. And the surcharge was $26,000. Of normally, with a full hotel, that it would be $55,000. Okay? That's just a microcosm of what happens in households, what's happened in other businesses. Right? And there's been no support by the government, unlike what's taken place in other countries. There's a new phenomenon coming down the road, of which this government has not even addressed to this country. And that is a strong US dollar and interest rates. So what does a strong US dollar mean? It means that because we're pegged to the US dollar, there's no advantage an American gets in coming to St. Lucia. But the Mexican dollar, the peso, has devalued. The pound is down to 115. Okay, euro is down below to 90 cents. So it means that for Americans to travel to Canada, to travel to Mexico, to travel to the Dominican Republic,
it's easier for them to go there.
It's cheaper.
Yeah, and cheaper.
Okay? And for those persons outside of the United States who want to travel, Canadians and UK, coming to St. Lucia, it's becoming more expensive. Right? Now, that is with the beginnings of a recession in Europe and in the UK. Right? And certainly a contraction that's taking place in spending power in the US, which is now being further exasperated by the increase in interest rates. So globally, the central banks have said they're going to eliminate inflation, and so the way that they're going to do it is to slow down the growth. That's going to have an impact on all of us. Right? So a government is supposed to see those things coming. It can't do anything to change them. But you can change yourself as to how you're going to do it. How you fight that is to understand that your export market has to compete on a global basis in a much more difficult time. And how do you help them reduce their cost of operations in this country in order that they can stay alive? And it's not about making money, because what you want those businesses, and I keep on saying this, my support for the business community is selfish. It's not for them. It's for the people of this country. It's an understanding that they're the ones generating the jobs. And the stronger those businesses are, the more jobs they're creating, and the more people can depend on getting those salaries. So it's for that reason. And it's even more so in the context of a St. Lucia, because we don't have a social net program. So when people get unemployed in this country, they go from something to nothing. Right? And so you must understand it may be better for government to subsidize some of these businesses in the short term, to make sure that those jobs stay in place, because the cost to government is going to be too heavy if in fact they lose those jobs.
Let's move on. We could stay on the economy forever and dissect what's happening. St. Jude Hospital. You designed a new facility, an improvement to what was on the ground, an upgrade, a bigger complex, away from the initial St. Jude's complex. Now the administration of Philip Pierre is in, going back to the original St. Jude site. What's really happening with St. Jude? The people want it completed. Are we going? This Friday will be the 13th anniversary since the fire.
Since the fire.
Too much politics with St. Jude, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Because if you're going to look at the facts of the situation, it's a very easy decision. So, and again, I try to simplify things so that persons can really appreciate the context of which we're talking about. Before we decided to build the new building, the government had spent $130 million on the facility. And through their own admission and their own reports, we're projecting they would have to spend another $100 million. So it means that that St. Jude's complex would have taken $230 million to have completed. And we also now know that it would not have been world class. When you think of what a hospital is today, all the services are in one singular building. You shouldn't have to be getting out of the building. That's not what St. Jude's had, what, 14 different buildings? And that the structure did not meet code. Are there hospitals around the world that don't meet code? Yes. But I'm just saying, if you're going to spend $230 million, the expectation is you're going to get world class. Right? So when we came in, and it took time to do that level of evaluation and to contemplate what the solution to the problem was, because if in fact you could build a better building for $100 million, okay, or $130 million, is that not better? So here it is, that the building that's up right now, the cladded building, which is 20% larger than OKEU, so it's 220,000 square feet of hospital space, was built for $110 million. Of that $110 million, the contractor is still owed $25 million. So let's put that on the table. To operationalize the hospital, to accommodate what is currently at the stadium, would take $40 million. So it means that you could build a new building, bring everybody into the ground floor for $150 million, versus spending $100 million more to have an inadequate building.
Yeah, that you have already spent 160 on.
That you've already spent 140 on.
140.
Right? Now, it wasn't to say that we weren't going to use those buildings. So we said, wow, okay, we have a huge opportunity. One of the fastest growing sectors is health. Right now there's a demand for 12 million nurses. Okay? We've seen St. George's, we've seen Ross universities, we've seen what the medical universities are doing. And many of the medical universities are complaining because they would like to have a hospital near them in order to be able to do the internships. So here was an opportunity, we said, because when I look at that original building that was being built, it looks like a university. It would be ideal. So imagine having an international nursing school university right there. Not just for St. Lucians, but for other persons in the OACS. And being able to be attached now to the hospital. And they complement each other. So that was the holistic plan that was in mind. And that you then have an upper floor to be able to grow in. So as you get your cruise ship port going, as the airport opens up, as more and more people move into the south, as more and more investment comes into the south, you have a hospital that can grow, right, for the foreseeable future in that area. And we also said that we need to have an international hospital. So I have learned that this idea of speaking corporatively within the OACS doesn't work. When you try to manage it, it's better to go out and build something world class, and they will come. So our forensic lab is a very good example. I was a huge critic of the forensic lab when it came out, because I said we cannot afford the forensic lab for St. Lucia alone. But what I learned is by going out and investing in the forensic lab, making it world class.
The other countries will come and get the service.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so it just happens because of merit, rather than trying to pre-organize it. So the goal was, and that's why we had, what do you call them, Cayman Health City, the Indian group, Naraya group, involved. Again, best practices. Wasn't to say somebody who was going to come here and make an investment on the hopes of achieving something. When I went to Cayman and I met with the cabinet in Cayman as to the impact of what Cayman Health City was. They said when people were coming to buy homes and they would go and see this world-class hospital, they signed the next day, right? So it helped now give greater confidence in your destination, right? So everybody benefits from something like that. The greatest political crime, one, is certainly the wastage of money and the time that's taken place. And this constant habit of the Labour Party to provide disinformation, right? In terms of justifying a decision based on a wrong, rather than justifying a decision on what is right.
On merit.
Okay? If the government, it's their prerogative. Don't come and use the excuse and suggest to people that there was fraud, because that's what the innuendo is all the time. Yet they've not been able to provide any evidence of fraud. And that's a government that's not serious about corruption. Because if they were serious about corruption, Richard Frederick, Ernest Hilaire would not be in their cabinet. Because all the evidence is available as to why they should not be there, and they're not acting on it. So it tells me they're not serious about that. That's just rhetoric. That's just an excuse that's being made.
In the words of the infamous Rick Wayne, that's for an entirely different show. So let's go back to St. Jude. What would you have done different with this project in particular?
Finished it.
Yeah.
Finished it.
Yeah.
You know, and we wanted to finish it. Every effort was being made to finish it. Sadly, with COVID, the supply chain issues caused a problem. And the other problem that really was there was that there were some people who believed that we were going to build out the entire building. It was never, how are you going to build out 220,000 square feet at this point? Right? The priority was to build it so that we could accommodate what was currently in operation at the stadium. We brought in eventually the Cayman House City people to help us design it. Yes, the staff were being consulted at St. Jude's, but St. Jude's has been operating as a triage for what? Almost 15 years. Yeah. To say that they're going to know where to take it and what the new modern practices are, that's not taking anything away from the people there, but that's just the environment that they were in. So we had to bring them into a new environment and retrain them to maximize the design that was being put in place. Right? And that was going to work. Everything was done. It would have taken 4 months to complete it. Where we were, 4 months. So when the Prime Minister speaks, there was a bill that was going to go. Yes. So we had two problems. We had to pay the $25 million that we owed, and we had to find the $40 million to complete the building. And that's what the financing arrangements that were being arranged. To go and say, well, the contractor was going to get paid an interest rate. He was giving us credit for 1 year. He's not a bank. So the intention is to now put the other financing in place to replace the money that we owed him. But if in fact we did not do it in order to incentivize government to do it, then it's a high interest rate cost because it's his money that's tied up in that whole thing. So the reality is everything was left for them. Everything was left for them for HIA. Everything was left for them for the Rodney Bay Road. Rodney Bay Road is a disaster.
Yeah, HIA quickly, Prime Minister Chastanet, you had a concept where it was being built by St. Lucians.
By SLASPA.
By SLASPA. The Taiwanese experts were on here, OECC were on island to lead that process. It would be managed by SLASPA, who have an exceptional track record of management of
a bad building.
of a bad building and of our main ports of entry. Currently, the Prime Minister has revisited that concept, and he's going to go the way of a PPP. Leasing it out to somebody who is going to build it and run it for a period of 40 years, then hand it over to the government of St. Lucia. What say you?
I don't have any difficulty with a PPP. Okay, so there are times where PPPs make all the sense in the world, but just for the sake of a PPP is not sufficient reason. And what do I mean by that? It's what the ultimate cost is. And there are solutions who I think now I can see are deliberately trying to muddy the waters. And say, Alan Chastanet wanted to burden the taxpayers of this country with a heavy load, right? Whether it's the PPP model or the SLASPA model,
it's the taxpayers of the country.
The source of the money is the same, which is the head tax. Okay? It's not different. It's the head tax. And of the head tax, 85% of the head tax, and as we grow from a tourism perspective, that number becomes greater, are paid for by tourists. So really, it's tourism that's paying for the HIA airport, and rightfully so, because they're the main users of it. The only solutions that are contributing to HIA are the solutions that travel. Okay? So on the SLASPA model, $35 was being allocated per passenger. So it means if you have a head tax of $98, right, $60 or $64 was remaining with the government. In the model for the PPP, it's proposed that it be $60. So there's a fundamental difference right away. One is 35 and one is 60. So it means in the PPP model, only $38 is left instead of 60 something dollars being left. The next difference is that under the SLASPA model, you pay the $35 for 20 years. But if in fact there are more passengers that arrive than you had projected, and you can pay the loan back quicker, you stop paying the $35 once the loan is paid off. On the PPP model, you pay the $60 for 30 years, regardless of the number of passengers. The Labour Party's response to that is to say, well, the people are not getting a tax holiday, so they have to pay corporate taxes. Now, that is even more insulting to people's intelligence. So you're telling me I'm going to bring a foreign investor to this country, give him $60, and if he makes more money than he was projected, that of every dollar extra he makes, he gets to keep 70 cents and the government gets to keep 30 cents. That makes sense to anybody? The PP model makes 0 cent financial sense for the country. So if in fact he does go to that, then everybody has to become extremely suspicious as to why.
Yeah. He's also alleging hefty corruption in the initial stage of the project. He's saying in the foundation stage there was heavy corruption. How do you respond to that? It's a process that is managed
it's defamatory, not to me. Okay, it's defamatory to the board of SLASPA. It's defamatory to the executive, senior executive members of SLASPA. It's defamatory to the World Bank. It's defamatory to the local and regional banks who participated in this loan.
The OECC as well?
And the OECC and the Taiwanese, right? The fact is that a very heavy layered administration was put in place. So OECC, which is an extremely experienced construction company, was the overall contractor. SLASPA had a unit that was developed specifically for HIA Airport. And then Harry International, very world-renowned company, was hired also to provide oversight. So all decisions had to be vetted 3 times. And I say, that was done in a large part because of the allegations that had been made previously. So we wanted to make sure that government was completely hands off of this and that it had a very strong governance structure. And that is the reason why the banks came on board, because they saw that. Now, the comments that the Prime Minister are not damning to me. He's undermining the credibility of SLASPA, which will have an effect on SLASPA moving forward. And he needs to take back those words. There was no corruption. There was no possibility of corruption. And then the idea that there was a cost overruns, where it always was projected that the cost of the piling was going to be $20.2 million, and it came in at $20 million. So there was no cost overruns. So I have no idea the number that he has that he's making a comparison to. Where would that come from? Where does this idea of 300 piles come from on that site? And then it's further exasperated by his claims that me as Prime Minister influenced the location. When SLASPA Special Unit, Harry International, IKO, and ECA.
Because we appreciate the understanding by the experts then. You couldn't have undertaken a project of that magnitude on the same, and operate Hewanorra at the same time, at the same complex. So
well, that's the justification of moving.
It would have been disastrous to attempt construction of that sort of facility.
Given the numbers.
Given the numbers.
And then, more importantly, to have demolished the building afterwards.
Right.
So again, with the plan of a cruise ship port, the idea was that, okay, how can we salvage the building and retrofit it now to a different purpose? and it can handle any overcapacity needs, right? Any over-demand needs at the major airport.
Would you revisit what's happening at St. Jude if reelected, at Hewanorra if reelected?
No, unless the experts told me to. But I mean, the plan was left there to look for the future. So one, the decision to put the departures and arrivals above each other, like what happens in many other countries, is an appreciation of the value of land and the limitation of land around an airport. Okay? So to give us as much room for expansion as possible. So it was very well thought out from a longer term basis. And as I said to you, if your vision for Vieux Fort is less, and it seems to me that this government's vision for the South is substantially less ambitious than ours. Right? So when I hear the cruise ship port coming into Castries and not into Vieux Fort, that tells me something. When government doesn't show up to the opening of the third wing of the call center, that tells me what I need to know. Right? When there's no discussions as to what's going to happen to DSH, whether it's DSH that's going to continue or what's going to replace DSH, there's no urgency. Right? And then now, stopping St. Jude's and stopping HIA, I have to ask myself, okay, where are we going?
We're running out of time, so we have to wind down. We have another guest waiting. Two more from me. The special prosecutor bill has been brought to Parliament. The Prime Minister has said that he's moving to appoint the special prosecutor as an agent of the public service. From your desk as the former Prime Minister, do you have anything to be worried about?
I mean, personally?
As the former Prime Minister?
No. No. The only thing I think that we should be concerned with, and I said it, I said, let's put the politicians aside, because politics is going to be played. Right? I mean, when I look at some of the things they've done, I can expect anything. I'm warning the civil servants that when they complain about political victimization, this becomes a very big tool for that. So the constitutionality of what has taken place is still to be determined. And that's something that's probably going to end up in the courts. Right? Because I don't know how through an act, because the highest form of law in our country is the Constitution. You cannot have any law that in any way subverts or contradicts the Constitution. The Constitution is what gives the power to the DPP and to the Attorney General. So I don't know that Parliament has the right to go in and create a parallel institution to divert from what that is. And what I'm saying to the public is that the DPP has a very special authority, and that's the determination as to whether to prosecute. The DPP is not the person who investigates. Right? So the DPP depends on customs, depends on the police, or any other special entity impacts to do the investigation. And the DPP's office, and the DPP in particular, evaluates the evidence and determines whether in fact that there should be a prosecution. That's a very, very important thing, because once you make a charge against somebody in our society, it becomes stigma to that person. So if there is a permanent staff member of the civil service, and I'm having problems with them, and I'm controlling the special prosecutor, and the special prosecutor simply makes an allegation and decides to charge them, right? We're going on very dangerous grounds here. We have a prosecutor. What we need is an office to do the investigations. So when I look at certain situations, I know that you don't want to go down that road, Rovergate, or other incidences have taken place, that why is it it's taken it so long to get to the prosecutor appeared? And that's the problem that we have. And we're also living in a small society, I can tell you that, Shannon, in which people say things in general, but when it comes down to specifics and the personalities get involved, we back off.
Pretty vague.
Okay? And then we want to know why is it that people are not being held accountable. So the special prosecutor brings up two things for me. One, whether in fact it's constitutionally consistent. And the second thing is, it said that they are going to go after public officers that use their positions to benefit themselves or their family members. And we're replete with examples of that. right? And the Prime Minister, who was then the leader of the opposition, had an opportunity to have dealt with that in his own party. Okay, so I'm not saying that it's exclusive to his party, but he had an opportunity to say to everybody, I'm taking this seriously, and it applies evenly to everybody else. So the reality, they have not done that. And they've been asked on several occasions to do that, and they haven't. So the Special Prosecutor Act is just another ploy by this government to shift people's eyeballs away from what it is. But the reality is, I can say this to you, Shannon. You see that pocketbook? Mm-hmm. That's what dominates. And right now, people are suffering. Yeah. Okay? Unemployment is skyrocketing in this country. This report they put out by the Chamber of Commerce and trying to interpret it as a vote of confidence is a joke. The survey was based on recovery from COVID. It wasn't asking people about moving forward.
Right? There was also some damning sentiments from the Chamber's membership in that report as well, if you pay a close attention to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. How this government has handled the inflation and supply chain issues, pathetic. Yeah. And the reality is the impact of not doing HIA, the impact of not following up on St. Jude's, the impact of stopping road projects, the impact of stopping the housing projects, okay? And the level of partisan politics that's taking place in this country is having a damning effect on people's confidence and certainly on the economy.
Finally, sir, we have to wind down. My last question, 14 months after a general election that you've lost, mm-hmm. Has St. Lucia seen and benefited from the best of Alan Chastanet, or is that best still to come?
Well, I wish I could look into, I wish there was a crystal ball that I could look into to see what that's going to, that's a very difficult question for me to be able to answer. I just learned that when we have difficult times, you take one step at a time, right? And you try not to run very fast. And I certainly have never been a person that presumes anything. I do not believe that any one person is the sole reason for anything. Sadly, I think as St. Lucia goes, we all have to appreciate we have a role to play, mm-hmm. right? And if we want to see a change in what's happening in our country, it starts with each one of us every single day. And I think at the speech that I gave in New York, I alluded to that. You know, what is patriotism? To what extent are we willing to defend the name of St. Lucia? And if we have a democracy, can we all honestly say that we're using it? So when you hear that only 51% of the people came out to vote, and now the voters list is a little bit padded, so maybe it's a bit better than 51%, right? Do we see people using their voices properly? Are we seeing the level of advocacy that ought to be done? And those are very important questions, because there's no point in having and claiming that we have a democracy if we're not going to use it. And I can say to you, certainly as a Prime Minister, I got into my fair share of criticism, but I liked it. Now, as long as that criticism was based on evidence, right? There has to be factual evidence. And when you start bringing it down to that, and we can say, well, I made this decision, I didn't make this decision, I always was very long-winded in my explanations, because I always felt it was important to lay out what my assumptions are. And if persons can point to things in my assumptions that may be wrong or they may disagree with, that would then affect the final decision that was being made. But the reality is, I can say to you, as Prime Minister of this country, I only wanted what was the best for this country. And I certainly come from a school of thought that I don't believe in mendicancy. I don't believe in going out and begging for anything. I believe in putting our best foot forward. And I've learned that if you earn persons' respect, then more will come to you. But if you sit back and have this expectation that people are going to help you, you're going to be in problems. And there are a lot of things that need to be fixed up in this country and addressed in this country. And that's why we said we need to build a new St. Lucia, because we said it was so broken that we had to do that. And we were attacking the problem on multitudes of fronts. Education, I can go through everything we were doing in education. Healthcare, security, economic opportunity, right? All those things were being addressed. Housing. So the reality is we could not get everything done in 5 years. And certainly with COVID coming in, it made it virtually impossible, because COVID was about just surviving. I mean, we lost half of the government's revenue in 1 year, unplanned, because we lost the revenue in March with the budget in April. Right? And I thought that the success that we had was in a matter of 6 weeks. Now, it wasn't 6 weeks of work because I started working on it since January because I saw it coming, right? But by the time the budget came, we were able to present a budget, even with a shortfall of $500 million of government revenue, that we could have made up that revenue with the loans that we got from the development agencies. And the fact is that those loans came with a 10-year moratorium at a 0.5% interest rates. So literally free. But we have to repay it at some point. But the fact is that where else were we going to get the money? And so for persons to believe that that money was coming in to do progressive things during COVID, it was budgetary support. And the IMF and CDB do not allow you to use their monies to pay debt. So it means that if you, in your budget, were going to pay the debt from other sources, well, from that IMF, I had to now replace it. So that's why you saw the IMF money being used for the Millennium Highway. Because I could not use it for debt. But the reality, it was there for budgetary support.
Prime Minister Chastanet, now Leader of the Opposition and Member of Parliament for MICOUD South, thank you. We've only just skirted the issues.
Yes.
Like
each one requires a show by itself.
Definitely. So we'll have you back another time. I anticipate it will be well ahead of the next election campaign cycle. So thank you for coming this time around.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
It's really great to see a young person putting a positive way forward. And I can say too, the field that you've chosen, journalism, is one that really needs an injection of professionalism. And I think that there are a lot of persons in journalism who have the right attitude, but sadly don't have the right training. And I keep on saying, and I want to repeat this, the job of a journalist is to be able to help their audience decipher for themselves what the truth is. So the reality is your job is to try to do as much research as possible to give people the evidence so that they can, but it's not for journalists to make up people's minds.
Yeah.
The moment that you see any journalist trying to influence people to go one way or the other, that's called propaganda.
You present the facts and you allow people to dissect from themselves.
It's not for you to have an opinion. You know, I can only say that because my daughter's going into journalism.
Excellent.
And I keep reminding her, you know, that her job is not to pick a side.
It's not the most lucrative job here on the island, St. Lucia, so a reminder of that as well.
Yeah. No, but that speaks to our society, because this is, you know, in our democracy, right? Journalism plays a significantly important role. And I just want to plea on behalf of all the business people is to understand that. But you also have your advertising dollars. And it's to use your advertising dollars to companies and entities that are willing to practice journalism in its truest form and making a contribution to our democracy. But if they're contributing to the propaganda, then that's a very different ballgame. Yeah.
Mr. Chastanet, thank you. We'll have you again the next time. And he's heading down to Deriso to handle some school donations. So we have to let him go right now and join our next guest who is standing
and
by.
Thank you to the people of MICOUD South. We had a very successful football program. OG and the guys in T. Roche did an amazing kids.
Deriso is now the place to be for football, you know, under the lights.
You know, and look, we've got the lights in the AstroTurf. I'm sorry that we were not able to finish the other supporting facilities. I'm hoping that this government will allow us to be able to do that. But the reality is it's transformative. And the economic impact of that activity in the constituency is amazing.
Yeah. We'll talk again with the former Prime Minister at a later date. Stay with us here on the program. The Deputy Chief Education Officer, Mr. Ragunanan, Mr. Dawson Ragunanan, is standing by. There's a lot of head talk in the island. We'll talk about education, the back to school plans with him in just a moment. Stay with us. Good morning, St. Lucia. We'll return in just a bit.
Why pay full price for your mobile when you can pay half? Just bundle your home internet and mobile services with Flow and save 50% on your